Hello, good day, and welcome to our Reimagining Long-Term Care webinar series. My name is Neil Dreimer. I work as the Director of the Health Innovation Programs at Healthcare Excellence Canada. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm so pleased to be your host for today's session. HSC honors the traditional territories upon which our staff and partners live, work, and play. We recognize that the standard of living that we enjoy today is the result of the stewardship and sacrifices of the original inhabitants of these territories. We must commit to not repeat past mistakes and to work towards more equitable and respectful relationships with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Acknowledging the territories and the original stewards of these lands is a fundamental responsibility of our organization and part of our commitment to work towards truth and reconciliation. I also want to recognize that just yesterday it was National Indigenous Peoples Day, and hopefully you had a chance to acknowledge and recognize this important day wherever you were. I also want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from my home office in Ottawa, which is on the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place and the opportunity to gather here today. I also invite you to share who you are and where you're joining from in the chat box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. I also wanted to let you know we are pleased to offer French simultaneous interpretation for this session. If you wish to hear the voice of the interpreter, please select French from the interpretation menu at the bottom of your screen. We invite you to share your questions and comments throughout this webinar in either of our official languages. If you have a comment or a question, please feel free to add it in the chat box. We'll look to address as many of your questions as we can during the Q&A session, which will happen towards the end of the webinar. Also, if you need any technical support at any time during this webinar, you can reach out to our tech support using the chat feature. Also wanted to make sure you're aware this session is being recorded and will be available on our website in the next few days to review and share with colleagues who missed it. So now it's my pleasure to welcome our speakers for today, Liz Horvath and Laura Mullally from the Mental Health Commission of Canada. They're going to be speaking to you today about a really important topic, mental health and psychological safety in the long-term care workspace or workplace, pardon me. Liz leads the Psychological Health and Safety Program within the Opening Minds Division of the Commission. This program is dedicated to helping organizations thrive by equipping them with the data, knowledge, and skills they need to implement effective workplace mental health strategies that result in measurable improvement towards ensuring a psychologically and health towards ensuring, that psychological health and safety is embedded in how they do business. She has more than 25 years experience in helping organizations implement health and safety management systems, including the development of the National Standard of Canada for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. And she brings her passion for people's well-being and success to all she does. Laura joined the Commission in 2016 and currently is the Manager of Knowledge Mobilization, leading work in the older adult mental health space, as well as youth mental health and the SPARK National Knowledge Translation Training Program. Prior to joining the Commission, Laura worked in community and national level nonprofit organizations, focusing on health promotion, community engagement, project management, and stakeholder relations. She holds a Master of Public Health and Health Promotion from the University of Alberta. Laura is passionate about health equity and mobilizing change in the health and the mental health system. So I want to welcome Liz and Laura, and once again, remind you to feel free to drop any questions into the chat box throughout the presentation. Over to you, Liz and Laura.
Thank you so much, Neil. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, based on where you're joining from today. I want to thank Neil, Joanna, and the Healthcare Excellence Canada team for inviting us to present on this webinar. My name is Laura Mullally. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm excited to be here alongside my colleague Liz to be talking to you about mental health in the workplace and specifically mental health in long-term care workplaces. There's a growing mountain of research that shows that workers who feel valued and safe are more motivated, more productive, and more creative at problem solving. Within healthcare and long-term care, staff who feel supported and psychologically safe are also able to provide the quality of patient care that they desire. We're looking forward to unpacking that more with you today. Next slide. Before we begin, I also would like to acknowledge that the Mental Health Commission of Canada's head office and where I'm calling in from today, where I live, work, and play, is on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation that is now called Ottawa, Ontario. We acknowledge that for thousands of years, the Algonquin peoples protected these lands, the Ottawa Rivershed, and its tributaries. As a national organization, we also acknowledge that we work on the traditional lands of many different nations. And today, a path towards truth and reconciliation begins with recognizing both the stewardship and sacrifices of the original peoples. We're committed to recognizing the errors of the past, acknowledging the challenges of the present, and continuing to a new and equitable relationship with the First Peoples. Next slide. So to start, for anyone who is unfamiliar with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, we're a national not-for-profit organization. We were created in 2007 and were funded predominantly by Health Canada. The MHCC is a catalyst for improving the mental health system and changing attitudes and behaviors of Canadians around mental health problems and illnesses. Our three pillars of our strategic plan act as the base of our engagement, and you see them here on the screen. To inquire by seeking out the best research and disseminating it, to inspire by combating stigma in all of its forms, including structural barriers, and to improve through improved access to quality mental health services and programs through cutting-edge demonstration projects. As a part of our mandate, the MHCC is committed to helping employers create and maintain healthy workplaces by providing tools, information, and supports needed to ensure that every person in Canada can go to work knowing that their organization recognizes the importance of psychological health and safety in the workplace. Next slide. And the case for why we should be paying attention to this, paying attention to mental health and psychological health and safety, and specifically in the healthcare workforce, is clear. We know that in any given week, 500,000 Canadians will be unable to work due to a mental health problem or illness, and that healthcare workers are 1.5 times more likely to need time off due to illness or disability than workers in any other sector. There are growing pressures to meet mental health needs at a time when 43% of mental health and substance use healthcare providers say that they have less capacity to deliver services than they did during pre-pandemic times. And even before COVID-19, healthcare workers were living with stress, depression, anxiety, and risk of burnout. Results from a recent national survey that we conducted during the pandemic recognizes that healthcare workers are highly resilient and continue to work very hard to provide the care that they want to others. But that being said, many are at their breaking point while trying to meet the challenges that have been amplified by COVID-19. 40% of healthcare workers report feeling burnt out, 50% have reported their intention to leave their profession, and 60% are not satisfied with the quality of care that they are able, 60% are satisfied with the quality of care that they are able to provide. And this is why it's important to protect and promote psychological health and safety of healthcare workers. And in doing so, healthcare organizations can reduce absenteeism and turnover, boost recruitment and retention, improve morale and relationships, enhance organizational reputation, and most importantly, improve patient satisfaction and quality of care. Every healthcare worker in Canada deserves to be employed by an organization that prioritizes psychological health and safety and the well-being and mental health of healthcare workers that can make a tremendous difference in the quality of care that they and their organizations can provide. Next slide. And the truth is that we have the power to shift this story if we shift our thinking and start working proactively. Albert Einstein once said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that created them. So this starts in the workplace by recognizing and understanding that we bring our full selves to work each day, that each one of us has mental health, that it exists along a continuum, and that recovery from mental health illnesses is possible. We can support the mental health of many people by proactively addressing workplace factors that affect the mental health of workers. I'm going to pass it over to Liz to keep going with our presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So what we'd like to do now is ask you a question, and I'd like you to type into the chat, what do you think about when you hear the term mental health? Just type in the first thing that comes to your mind. What do you think about when you hear the term mental health? Okay, so we see things like broken, stress, wellness, someone's vulnerable, inequitable access, being happy, well-being, anxiety, crisis, how you feel about yourself, depression and anger, balance. Okay, someone would like to find it. Stress, depression, anger, judgment. Okay, thank you so much for participating in that little exercise. The reason that I ask people to do this is, you know, we ask this in pretty much every one of the webinars that we do, and inevitably, no matter what no matter what industry people are in, we tend to hear the same sorts of things, and we hear quite a lot of people talking, the first thing that pops into their mind are things like anxiety, stress, depression, difficulty coping, things like that. And then some people talk about wellness and well-being and being able to cope and balance and things like that. So it's not unusual to see the mix of what people think about when they first think about mental health. But what we'd like to ask you to do is to start shifting your thinking. So if we could go to the next slide. This is the actual definition of mental health from the World Health Organization. And what you'll notice about this is that it states it's a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities. They can cope with the normal stresses of life. They can work productively, and they're able to make a contribution to their community. And what the World Health Organization has said is that in the positive sense, mental health is the foundation of well-being and effective functioning of an individual and for a community. And certainly a workplace is a community. But what I'd like you to also notice is what this definition does not say. It does not say that mental health is an absence of mental illness. In fact, there's no reference to mental illness at all in the definition of mental health. Mental illness is actually a wide range of conditions that are basically disorders that affect mood, thinking, and behavior. Examples are depression, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, eating disorders, and addictive behaviors. And everyone is along this continuum somewhere between mental illness and mental health at any given time. But the key point here, and you can learn more about that mental health continuum, and I'll show you what that is in a little while. But the key point here is that supporting the mental health of employees is so important, but to focus on what the definition of mental health actually is. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what this is really about is about helping people in the workplace to have peak performance. There's no shame in talking about mental health, and in fact, reaching out for help or accessing treatment is a good thing to do. But we know from personal experience that that's not easy, and there's a number of reasons for that. Stigma, self-stigma. We know that these are the most important barriers to recovery. And we also know that failing to reach out for help is not helpful if we don't recognize what's happening then. So what we want to do is really focus on that definition of mental health and about abilities and about being able to cope and about being able to work productively and fruitfully and being able to have enough energy when you're outside of the workplace to how to do that contribution to community, whether that's family or community outside of the home. So if we focus in the workplace on how do we help people to be able to maintain that level of peak performance, that's where we're really going to be focusing. You know, it's okay to be a bit tired at the end of a day, and we are not saying that all stress is bad. We know that that there's a certain amount of stress that is necessary for us to operate well as human beings. We, you know, that makes us motivated and creative and energetic, and being able to do that work that we so passionately want to do. But when there's too much stress, too much pressure, and too much stress, then we can start to see things starting to slide. That we may see certain indicators like being indecisive or fuzzy minded or exhausted, even irritability, anxiousness, and potentially burnout. So these are the things to be to watch out for. And we want to be able to equip people with coping mechanisms on this. And there's a few different tools and resources that we're going to show you to be able to do this. So next slide, please. So when we talk about mental health in the workplace, you know, what we're really looking for is to prepare people in the workplace to recognize signs and be able to hear what that person is going through and guide them to helpful resources and ensure their own self-care. We also are looking at how we can reduce and eliminate stigma so that people will feel safe in reaching out for help, and managers and coworkers feel equipped to intervene when support is needed. And this also helps to someone to be able to overcome fear and uncertainty of what to say and what to do. And it gives them the confidence to have these crucial, potentially life-saving conversations. You know, we say at the Commission, recovery isn't just possible, it's expected. Now, that is you know, when we talk about mental health, just remember that, again, everyone is along that continuum. Mental health does not mean an absence of mental illness. So even when someone is living with mental illness, there is a level of mental health, and we can certainly help to support people with that. Next slide, please. So it all begins with starting with people first language. And when it comes to discussing mental illness or declining mental well-being in everyday life, instead of emphasizing a person's condition, we want to use more appropriate people first alternative language. For example, instead of saying this person suffers from depression, we say this person lives with or is experiencing depression. Instead of saying this person committed suicide, we say this person died by suicide. Instead of that drives me crazy, nuts, or insane, we say that really bothers me, annoys me, or frustrates me. Instead of calling someone a junkie or an addict, we refer to them as a person who lives with a substance use disorder or a person who is in recovery. So hopefully you can see the shift that this type of language might make in combating stigma and really empowering a person to feel that it's okay to reach out for help and to talk about what they might be experiencing. And we put the link for this resource in the chat. Next slide, please. Another resource that we have created at the Mental Health Commission is How Am I Doing? You know, we often hear that some people have reluctance or even fear about having conversations with people about mental health. And while there's many resources that can help, the Opening Minds Division of the Mental Health Commission has created many great resources, and this is just one of them. So this resource was developed from the mental health continuum that's in the Working Mind course, and some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not. But there is a course that's available that does talk about this continuum. So the way that this continuum works is that at one end of the continuum is when a person is feeling mentally healthy. The other end of the continuum is where they may be experiencing difficulty with mental illness. and there's a couple of stages in between. So we talk about it going from green to red, with yellow and orange in between, as a person may move along this continuum. And this How Am I Doing resource was based on that continuum. So it's a wonderful free tool that can be used to help support your own mental health and the mental health of your team. And there's some key questions there, and there's a QR code that can take you to the mental health continuum that can help to open up these conversations. So let's have a look at that. And go to the next slide. So the mental health continuum, we also have a self-assessment tool, and the link is there that you can click on to go into the tool. And as I said, we all experience mental health and mental illness along this continuum. And one of the things to note about this tool is that it is not a diagnostic tool. It's simply designed to help you identify changes in mood, thinking, and attitude and behavior, performance, physical changes, and changes in addictive behaviors, so that you might be able to recognize when you or someone might be making changes in how they're coping, and being able to reach out for help. This tool can really help people to articulate what they're experiencing. So you don't have to put any personal information into the tool. All you do is click on the link, and you just click on the indicators that describe what you're experiencing. And you might see a pattern emerge that can help with understanding and having a conversation that can help. So let's have a look at this tool in a little bit more detail. We can go to the next slide. So this slide here represents what you might see when someone is in what we call the injured or the orange zone. This shows indicators that they may be at risk of a mental illness. So you would notice that there are things like in changes in mood, person has clicked that they're angry and anxious, they're irritable, changes in thinking and attitude. There's a few different things that are clicked there. There's some showing up in the zone under ill. So I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail because we don't have time for that here, but I would encourage you to check out the tool. What you see is when you're clicking on those, you'll see that patterns emerge. And as I said, these can help with opening up a conversation. One of the things I've done in the past is I've done this and I've simply printed it off. And that has been able to help with opening up that conversation because it's helping to articulate. Whether it's a conversation with a supervisor, whether it's a conversation with a healthcare provider, this can really help to open up the conversation and describe how the person is feeling, especially when we're in that injured or ill zone. It becomes very difficult to actually be able to describe what's going on. Now, if we go to the next slide, what we can see is how the tool may look when we're in a healthy zone, where most of the green zone or the healthy zone indicators are clicked. And what that shows is we can use this tool ongoing as a way to help recognize if things are shifting either way. So if it's shifting towards being ill or it's shifting towards recovery into the healthy zone. So I definitely would encourage people to use this tool. It's very, very helpful. We've had amazing feedback on it. And we have actually a brand new version of the tool that's just been developed that's even better. So just type into the chat if you think that this tool might be useful. Definitely, we're always interested to hear people's feedback on the tools that we're providing for them. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to shift now and talk a little bit about what psychological health and safety is. And I'm just going to answer a quick question there. Someone's asked if there's a PDF format to print out. You can I'll have to check in on that to see if that's available, but you can certainly print a copy of the tool right from the website and just, circle or highlight or whatever it is that you want to do. But I'll check to see if there's a PDF version. Okay, so let's talk about psychological health and safety for a little bit here. So, next slide, please. So psychological health and safety in the workplace is really about the way that the workplace impacts our psychological well-being. It's embedded into the way that people interact with one another on a daily basis. And it's part of the way that working conditions and management practices are structured within the workplace. It's also a systematic way about thinking about how work is done. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that we talk about when we are talking about workplace mental health is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that these things are intimately linked with workplace mental health, and it's important to taking steps to provide inclusive opportunities to better understand the diverse needs of employees and embrace and celebrate the different abilities, cultures, et cetera, that we have in our workplace, and how we can support those needs in the workplace for various employees. This is not about tokenism. It does require work, but it is well worth it. And we highly recommend attending training in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and looking at how policies and processes might need to be updated. And a couple of the quotes that are on the screen here, and seeing a diverse group of people around a table having a conversation, and the quotes on the screen say that diversity is the mix and inclusion. Diversity is the mix and inclusion is making the mix work. Another great quote here is diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. Next slide. So we also have a tool that can help with diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. It is called a practical toolkit to help employers build an inclusive workforce. And it is a free toolkit that you can download and use. Next slide. Now, by combining, and you can just click a couple of times to have the whole slide show up. Thank you. So by combining organizational protective factors and personal protective factors, we can actually reduce exposure to various harmful levels of stress, and we can improve resilience. And there's a few pillars that we're going to just look at here. Workplace factors, self-care and resilience, support systems, and helpful resources. Next slide. Another helpful resource that we have for you is the Self-Care and Resilience Guide that you can download. This was developed at the beginning of the pandemic, but it is a useful guide for any time. So you can use this individually or in teams. And again, another great guide to be able to use yourself and share with your teams. Next slide. And at this point, I will pass this over to Laura to talk about psychological health and safety, workplace factors.
Thanks, Liz. So one of the pillars that Liz had mentioned was these workplace factors. And this is a part of the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. So if you're unfamiliar with the standard, it was launched in 2013, and it's the first of its kind in the world. It's a set of voluntary guidelines, tools, and resources to help guide organizations to promote mental health and prevent psychological harm in the workplace. And the standard identifies 13 workplace factors that, when managed well, can contribute to a positive working environment that supports employee mental health and success. And if they're not managed well, they can be significant risk factors that can lead to mental harm. The 13 factors are quite interrelated with one another. You can see them here being things like recognition and rewards, so how we acknowledge and promote employee success, workload management, civility and respect. So the different factors can be quite interrelated. If you want to learn more about the 13 factors, you can take a look at the national standard, or linked on the page and in the chat is an online free training module called Being a Mindful Employee. And it's an online training that walks you through the 13 factors, provides examples of what they look like in practice, and different helpful resources as well. Next slide, please. So along the way to promoting psychological health and safety in diverse work environments across Canada for the better part last decade or so, we identified two specific factors that are specific and important for healthcare workers. And these two factors are support for psychological self-care and protection from moral distress. So to build on this work, we recently commissioned a mixed method research project in collaboration with Queen's University and HEC Montreal to identify facilitators and barriers to addressing these within workplaces, teams, and organizations in Canada. So I'm going to tell you briefly about each one of these factors. Next slide, please. So the first factor is support for psychological self-care. So we define this as a workplace where staff are encouraged to take care of their own psychological health and safety. And we know that self-care is a bit of a buzzword. So we don't mean just putting, a poster up in the lunchroom that says hooray for self-care, but actually enabling the conditions, the environments, and the policies that promote and allow space for staff to do so. So this could mean things like paid sick leave, protected break times, designated break spaces, paid education and learning opportunities, or replacement staff to enable self-care. So in our research, we looked at individual, team, and organizational facilitators and barriers that enable conditions for psychological self-care to occur. And in some of that research, we heard at the team level about things like supervisory skills and capacity, building strong team relationships that enables discussions about self-care, making clear work schedules and clear job descriptions, as well as organizational conditions such as protected time off, clear directives, policies and protocols, and workplace culture. Next slide, please. And then the second factor we were discussing about is protection from moral distress. So moral distress occurs when someone has to carry on with an activity that goes against their personal or professional values or moral beliefs. So in the context of healthcare, when workers are unable to uphold the oath that they took to deliver the best care and put the needs of their patients first, they can experience moral distress. So we define this factor as an environment where staff can do their job with a sense of integrity, consistent with their values, and that they're supported to do so. We can't always prevent morally distressing situations from occurring, but when they cannot be prevented, healthcare workers often don't get the opportunity to deal with or process the situation enough. So examples of how an organization can protect from moral distress include dedicated staff and resources for wellness, providing the space and time for debriefing sessions, clearly defined and consistently followed policies and protocols. And in our research at the team level, we heard about things like strong communication, relationships, management support and presence, respect in the workplace and within teams, acknowledging some of the challenges of power struggles that can sometimes be a barrier for moral distress as well. And at an organizational level, time and space to process events, ethical supports for debriefing, and human resources supports. So the research report, which I believe was provided in the chat, further outlines recommendations for healthcare organizations and decision makers to embed these supports for these factors, which ultimately influence the way that teams function and how individuals are affected. Next slide, please. And finally, just when we were doing this research that was quite general to all healthcare workplaces, we saw that we had a large response rate from those working in the long-term care sector. So we dove further into the research, including reviewing additional literature and talking to key informants about working in long-term care in order to better understand what these two factors mean in the long-term care context. So this resulted in a policy brief, the title being on the screen, and it provides a discussion and several calls to action to enable these two factors within long-term care. These reflect addressing the economic, social, and organizational challenges that long-term care has been facing, which have been long-standing since before the pandemic, but have been further brought to light since COVID-19, as well as the need for staffing supports, leadership, and human resource policies to support workers. Next slide, please. Just want to loop back on those original 13 factors that we had up on the screen and just highlight one more of them, which was psychological and social support. So we define this as an environment that is supportive of employees' psychological and mental health concerns and responds appropriately. One way that organizations can support this factor is through employee assistance programs, or EAPs. EAPs can be extremely helpful, but are often underutilized. Many people access EAPs once they're reminded of the confidentiality protection that's provided by EAPs, or if they hear from a colleague who's divulged that they have used an EAP before and that they found it helpful. Most EAPs provide services very quickly and are able to provide some short-term problem-solving models and supports, and then when appropriate, make referral to longer-term supports or treatments. But some research shows that about 15% of EAP users are referred on to additional supports, while 85% don't require support beyond the services that EAPs are able to provide. So a tip for managers or leaders is to find out more about your EAP if you do have access to one. Save the phone number, the link, whatever the portal may be to access it in your phone, in your email, somewhere where you can have easy access to access it yourself, perhaps for a family member, or to refer a colleague to it as well. Next slide. And if your organization does not have an EAP, you're not alone. It's not accessible for every organization. Do want to point you towards a free online website called Wellness Together Canada, which was launched in response to the growing mental health concerns related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Wellness Together Canada is a Health Canada funded project that's in partnership with Step Care Solutions, Kids Help Phone, and Homewood Health, which are three of Canada's leading and most innovative mental health organizations. And Wellness Together Canada offers supports in both official languages at no cost, which includes things like individual phone and video and text counseling, immediate text support, promotional and informational videos about different mental health illnesses, some self-guided mental wellness programs that you can follow on your own, as well as some different monitored communities of support. So if you haven't looked at Wellness Together Canada before, I do invite you to look at that website. Next slide, please. And this is just a slide that we like to provide that summarizes some of the numbers that are available, including Wellness Together Canada and some of the other crisis services that are available across Canada. A PDF of this was provided to you with the webinar reminder, but if you didn't receive it, I welcome you to take a picture of this slide, to use it yourselves, or to create something similar that perhaps does include your EAP information as well, if that's available to you. Post this slide in your workplace, if on your company's intranet, in the lunchroom, whatever makes sense for your context. Also recommend you keeping a copy of it in your phone if you're a people leader, to be able to refer colleagues or other staff to these resources as well. They're great to be able to have at your fingertips, and they are accessible to everyone in Canada. And I'm going to pass it back over to Liz.
Thank you, Laura. So what we're going to talk now about is, just very briefly, the fact that we may also need to provide accommodation for workers who may be having mental health challenges. So we have to remember that people who are experiencing mental health challenges can be productive in the workplace. Sometimes they just need a bit of support, and it's normal for all of us to be a bit more anxious and to show indicators of mental illness along that spectrum. So we have to consider things like, how can we accommodate workers who live with anxiety or mood disorders? Perhaps we need to make some adjustments to workload or schedules. Perhaps there's some expedited or increased benefits for mental health support and treatment. Maybe there's a systematic check-in or buddy system that's needed, or additional supports to help with management of symptoms. The guides that we've shown you here can help. One is from Workplace Strategies for Mental Health. That is the Supporting Employee Success tool. This is a fantastic tool that can be used by workers and managers to discuss what the various needs are with respect to different needs for accommodation. And it's very linked with what the workplace factors are. And it was developed by a group of mental health and workplace professionals. The Mental Health in the Workplace Accommodation Guide for Managers and Staff from CMHA, that's more around how to put together a good accommodation and disability management program that can support workers with mental health challenges. So both of these resources are very, very useful for the workplace. And I would definitely encourage you to download those as well. Whoops. Okay, so yes, so common key resources. We've talked about a lot of resources here today. There's a lot more resources that are offered by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And all of these links in the PDF of this slide deck are clickable. So we tried to make it as easy as possible for you to find some of these resources. We've got other ones like we have a mini guide on suicide prevention in the workplace. We have a mini guide on employees' mental health through winter. And even though we're just kind of going into summer right now, I would still recommend that you download that one. It does talk about seasonal affective disorder and kind of the changes and things that happen as seasons are changing. And what's a better time to get set up for the winter season is before winter, right? So would definitely recommend downloading that one. And then we also have this other great resource that was developed called Leading in a Hybrid Work Environment, which goes through a number of different things that managers can do to manage different areas of work, such as performance issues, conflict resolution, onboarding in a virtual or hybrid work environment, protecting your own mental health, and recognizing declining mental health in staff. So we've also provided a QR code there that you can simply scan with your phone, and that'll take you to a link tree with links that go directly to some of the resources as well as some of the training that's available. Thank you. Next slide. And so this pretty much brings us to the end. And we always like to end our webinars with a call to action. So there's a lot of things that you may have heard here today that you may be thinking, oh, I'd like to follow up on that, follow up on this, follow up on that. But we know that, once you step away from the webinar, things get busy. And sometimes it can be difficult to kind of go back and follow up on some of those things that you heard about. So I'd like to encourage you to commit to one key step that you will take today to support either your own mental health or the mental health of your team, or both. And just remember that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We're always trying to help to focus on prevention. And so anything that you can do with one key step, take a pen out, write it down, put it on a Post-it note, put it up in front of you, put it in your phone, whatever it is that helps to remind you of what that one key step is that you're going to take, whether it's downloading a resource and using it, whether it's perhaps doing the mental health continuum, perhaps it's reading up more about the workplace factors, the report that Laura talked about, or even reaching out for more help. Definitely encourage you to pick out one key step that you're going to follow up with. And with that, we'd like to thank you. We'd like to thank you. We'd like to thank Neil, our host, as well as Joanna and the tech support team in the background, Healthcare Excellence Canada, for hosting this webinar. And we want to thank each and every one of you and your organizations for taking the time out and for your dedication and commitment to being here today. And yeah, we'll open it up for some questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz and Laura, for the wonderful presentation. And I think you've left all of us with a lot of really valuable and I imagine some of these tools are, just from what you've shared, are things that we can bring into our day-to-day and our work space. So you've given us a lot to think about, but I do want to open it up for questions now, just to see if there are any specific questions that people might have, or general ones as well. So feel free to add those into the chat. Maybe I'll start, and I've already thought of a few. One of the things that you did mention, and I know that it did, we've heard a lot about this with the pandemic, with long-term care, but it's continuing now. Even we know there's lots of challenges related to the workforce and moral distress in healthcare. So I know you spoke a little bit to this, but are there any things that you would recommend we can start doing now to support staff who are going through this, or who might encounter this, the moral distress in their day-to-day?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. Thanks for that question, Neil. The research that we did was quite interesting and quite telling. We talked with numerous healthcare providers and about what they were experiencing both before the COVID-19 pandemic and how that was exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And there's many things that individuals can look to do. I mean, there's a lot of what we heard about with moral distress was really building that team culture that allows conversations to occur within a team, that safe space to discuss what they've experienced with colleagues, with supervisors, that mutual respect for what one another is experiencing. But then also the organizational factors of creating the conditions and policies as well, such as that debriefing time, to have more of that kind of structure in place. But I do welcome, there's kind of more even information within our report that was linked in the chat about additional individual, team, and organizational facilitators and barriers. There's lots of information in there to unpack, but I think what resonates most from me from the research is that team culture and that safety of discussion.
Thank you. And yeah, no, we've definitely heard a lot about, even in past webinars, about the importance of the team and safety. So thanks for highlighting those. Just picking up a few other questions that have come through the chat. So one was, given that, and we've definitely heard a lot about this, especially in long-term care, but it goes across the whole health system, the importance of essential family caregivers, and they are seen, and rightfully so, as part of the workforce, but they are unpaid. What is there any specific resources or tools or guidance available to them? Is there a targeted program or information? And I know there's lots of things at HEC that we've talked about, and how essential family caregivers can be part of the health team, but just wondering if you have any suggestions around that, specifically around the mental health and support around essential caregivers.
We have an entire website that is dedicated to advancing mental health in healthcare. So it's not necessarily targeted towards any specific profession within healthcare, but we do have quite a few resources that are on there, including some assessment tools to be able to determine, assess the organizational culture, and as well as assess the 13 factors, and now the 2 additional factors as well that Laura talked about. And there's also a fantastic guide in there on how to actually create those programs, the management system within healthcare organizations. So it does apply to anyone in healthcare. So I would definitely encourage people to have a look at what's within that website. All of the resources that are in there are free, and we also have the training for the working mind and mental health first aid that people can take, but they're not specific to people who are family caregivers. So Laura, I'm not sure if you have anything else that you have come across that is specific.
We have, the Mental Health Commission has done some work generally about caregiving, mostly that caregiving, and I can put the link in the chat momentarily about that, but it's more in the context of caregiving for people who are living with mental health problem or illness, and for being a caregiver in that context. But I think a lot of those principles about caregiving and the mental health of caregivers can be extrapolated to being a caregiver for anyone in many different contexts. So I'll put that in the chat. I definitely acknowledge, as you mentioned, the stress of caregiving in a long-term care context. A lot of workplace resources are specific to that definition of employee, but caregivers are within that environment providing care in a slightly different context and need to be acknowledged. So yeah, I'll put that in the chat though, the caregiving resources.
Thanks so much. And you just to point out, there's been lots of links that we've provided from the commission in the chat. So just want to point people to those, as well as the fact that this session is recorded. So we will be sharing it in a few days on our website if you weren't able to join at the start. Just another question. We've gotten quite a few here. I know you mentioned a little bit about the EAP program, and that is one sort of strategy to support staff. I guess the question is, and it's a question sometimes I wonder as well, like, we want to encourage staff to use it, and we want managers to know that it's there for their staff. If staff are reluctant or not open to using it, is there strategies to encourage them, or what other types of things would you suggest if they're not interested in the EAP route? I know peer support has been something that we've heard a lot about for many years now, but yeah, so just want to throw those questions to you.
I can start with taking a stab at this one. So we know from some of the research that was done, CMHA and the Simon Fraser Institute from BC, I believe, had done some research a number of years ago on the use of EAPs. And one of the things that they found was that the number one thing that prevented people from utilizing EAPs was not enough knowledge about what EAPs actually do and provide. So that was actually number one. So communicating more about what the EAP offers, maybe even bring people, EAP representatives in to talk with workers about what the EAP does, what it can provide, how to access those resources that are in there. That can make a tremendous difference. Another one of the issues that came up was distrust, people not believing that the EAP, or not understanding how the EAP would be confidential. Some people were afraid that the that the employer would get personal information about them if they utilized EAP. So helping people to understand the information that the employer gets is only aggregate information. It's overall information about EAP usage. There is no personal information that goes back to employers about anything that an employee has said or done, or specifically what they've accessed, nothing like that. So helping to build that level of trust. And I think one of the most important things that we saw was when people are actually talking about that they have experienced using an EAP and that it actually helped them. So giving people the opportunity to talk about that, if they are comfortable with doing that, can certainly help as well. And then the other one that came up was just not having time. You know, if we can link people, if we can take time, and even in the national standard, we talk one of the requirements in the national standard for diversity, for example, is linking people with the resources that are available to them. And the difference here is if I'm just going to my employees and saying, there's an EAP available, here's the number, it's posted up in the website, in the lunchroom, or it's in your intranet or wherever, and you're leaving it up to people, they may not have the time or the ability to access it. Whereas I know in some of my practice in the past, when my manager, for example, at one of my workplaces came to me and said, you know, we have this wonderful EAP program that can really help you with what you're dealing with right now. How about I take you to a room, we can give you, 15 minutes to half an hour to just contact them. And they gave me the time at work to be able to go in to a private area and be able to contact them. That was just so tremendously helpful, because outside of work, once I was outside the workplace, I'm dealing with home stuff, I'm dealing with shopping, I'm dealing with kids, I'm dealing with sick parents, I'm dealing with this and that and the next thing. I don't have time or space at home to be able to do that. So taking time to actually make those connections can be really helpful, and absolutely peer support. Totally agree with that. But in peer support, we have to make sure that people who are providing that peer support get some training, and that they are also able to set those boundaries and get the help that they may need also for what they may be providing that support for. They have to protect their own mental health and boundaries as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, there's lots of commentary coming in to the chat. I know we're almost at time, so I'm really sorry, but I think we have to end the question period today. But I do wonder, not to put you on the spot, Liz and Laura, but if we could send you any follow-up questions that we didn't get a chance to address today, and you can have a look at them, and the ones that you're able to answer, we can share that through after we share the recording, if that's okay. But I do want to thank all of you, all the participants, and again to Liz and Laura for really this valuable presentation. Obviously, 1 hour is not enough. It's just scratching the surface, but you've left us with lots of really important tools. So thanks once again. And I also wanted to point out, before everybody signs off, we would really appreciate you take a moment to provide your feedback. You'll see some questions on the screen, and we definitely look at these. And just a reminder, the question on gender is something that our funder Health Canada asks us to collect, but it's completely optional. And I also wanted to let you know our next webinar will be July 18th from 12 to 1 Eastern time, and this will be a panel discussion on providing culturally appropriate care in the long-term care setting. So with that, I want to thank everyone once again for your engagement and participation, and wishing you all a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.